At 07:34 hours on March 19, 1945, Aviation Machinist's mate second class Robert Chen stood on the flight deck of USS Essex, watching his squadron prepare for CAP, Combat Air Patrol, over Okinawa. The Japanese had just launched their first major kamikaze attack of Operation Iceberg. Intelligence estimated 40 suicide aircraft inbound. The 12 F4U Corsairs launching from Essex would be flying straight into them. Chen had been maintaining carrier aircraft for 14 months. He knew the Corsair inside and out. Inverted gull wing, 2,000 horsepower radial engine, 650 caliber machine guns, maximum speed 425 miles per hour. The Corsair was fast, heavily armed, and tough. But it had a problem that was getting Navy pilots killed every single day. They couldn't hit fast crossing targets consistently. The issue wasn't the guns. The Browning 50 calibers were reliable and accurate. The issue wasn't the pilots. They'd trained extensively in deflection shooting. The problem was that hitting a target crossing at high speed required calculating lead, aiming ahead of the target so your bullets and the target arrived at the same point. At 400 miles per hour closing speed, that calculation happened in fractions of a second. The pilot had to estimate the target's speed, angle, and distance, then translate that into how many mils to lead the target in his gun sight. The math was complex. The training was extensive. But in combat, when a kamikaze was diving at your ship and you had maybe 3 seconds to shoot it down, complex math didn't work. Pilots aimed, fired, and watched their tracers pass behind the target. By the time they corrected, the kamikaze was past them, heading for the ship. American doctrine said pilots should practice deflection shooting until it became instinctive. Thousands of training rounds, repetition until muscle memory took over. The Navy had been doing this for 3 years. But kamikaze pilots were different. They weren't maneuvering to survive. They were flying straight at the ships, maximum speed, no evasion. That made them predictable, but also incredibly fast crossing targets. And Navy pilots were missing them at rates that were getting ships sunk. Task Force 58 had lost 8 ships to kamikazes in the past month. 17 more damaged, dozens of sailors dead. The Combat Air Patrol was supposed to stop the kamikazes before they reached the fleet, but CAP intercept rates were running at only 34%. 2/3 of kamikazes that got past the destroyer picket line were making it through the fighter screen. Some were being shot down by ship anti-aircraft fire. Most weren't. They were hitting carriers, battleships, destroyers, and sailors were dying because pilots couldn't solve deflection math fast enough. Chen had watched gun camera footage from dozens of engagements. The pattern was always the same. Pilot spots kamikaze, rolls in for intercept, gets the target in his gun sight, fires. Tracers pass behind the target. Pilot corrects, fires again. Tracers pass ahead. Pilot corrects again. By then, the kamikaze is too close to the fleet. Other fighters engage or the ship's AA takes over. Sometimes the kamikaze is shot down, sometimes it isn't. The first pilot Chen lost to this problem was Lieutenant Junior Grade Michael Torres. February 14, 1945. Torres had been with VF-83 for 7 months. Good pilot, steady hands, 9 confirmed kills against conventional fighters. Chen had worked on Torres's aircraft since the squadron formed. They talked about cars. Torres was from Detroit. Chen was from San Francisco. Both had worked in garages before the war. Torres launched on KAP at 14:20 on Valentine's Day. Radar picked up a single bogey inbound at low altitude. Torres and his wingmen were vectored to intercept. They found the bogey at 8,000 feet. A 0 rigged as a kamikaze, heading straight for Essex. Torres rolled in from above. Perfect intercept angle. Got the 0 in his sight at 600 yards. The Zero was crossing left to right at approximately 60 degrees angle off. Torres lit the target, fired. His tracers arced out, passed 10 feet behind the Zero. Torres corrected, fired again, passed 5 feet ahead. He was bracketing the target but not hitting it. Range 400 yards. The Zero kept coming. Torres made one more pass. His rounds hit the Zero's tail section, damaged but not destroyed. The Zero kept flying. Torres was out of position, out of airspeed. His wingman came in, finished the Zero at 200 yards, but it had been close, too close. Torres came back frustrated, told Chen he'd had 3 clear shots, missed twice, barely hit on the third. The problem wasn't his gunnery. The problem was he was doing math while flying at 350 miles per hour, trying to hit a target crossing at 280 miles per hour. By the time his brain calculated the lead, the situation had changed. He was always reacting to where the target had been, not where it would be. 2 weeks later, Torres didn't come back. March 1st, 4 kamikazes inbound. Torres intercepted 1, made 3 firing passes, never got solid hits. The kamikaze made it through the KAP, dove on the destroyer USS Kimberly. Torres tried to follow it down, shoot it before impact. Dove too steep, too fast. Couldn't pull out, hit the water at 400 miles per hour, a quarter mile from Kimberly. The kamikaze hit Kimberly's starboard side, killed 18 sailors. Torres died trying to stop it. The second pilot was Lieutenant Commander James Morrison, the squadron's executive officer. 12 years in the Navy, 16 confirmed kills, experienced combat leader. On March 11th, Morrison led a 4-plane division against 6 kamikazes. Morrison engaged the lead kamikaze, a Judy dive bomber. Textbook intercept. Morrison had position, altitude, and speed. Got the Judy centered in his sight at 600 yards. The Judy was in a shallow dive, crossing right to left. Morrison calculated deflection, fired, missed, corrected, fired again, passed left wing. The Judy kept flying. Morrison made 2 more passes, finally destroyed the Judy at 300 yards from the fleet. But he'd fired over 400 rounds to do it. Should have taken 80 rounds maximum. Morrison knew it, told Chen afterward that he was spending too much time calculating and not enough time shooting. But if he didn't calculate, he'd waste even more ammunition missing. Chen watched the gun camera footage from both engagements, watched dozens more. The pattern was unmistakable. Pilots were making the right calculations, following the doctrine. But the calculation time was too long. They needed a faster way to judge deflection lead, something instinctive, something that didn't require math. The idea came to Chen on March 15th while watching a pilot practice deflection shooting on a towed sleeve target. The pilot was using the gunsights ring and cross pattern to estimate lead. The standard Navy Mk8 reflector gunsight projected a circular reticle with a central cross. The circle was calibrated so that specific points on the ring corresponded to specific deflection angles. In theory, a pilot could place the target at a specific point on the ring and be correctly leading it for that deflection angle. In practice, pilots couldn't remember which ring position corresponded to which deflection angle while in combat. The relationship between ring position and deflection angle varied with range and target speed. At 600 yards against a slow target, you might lead by 2 ring diameters. At 400 yards against a fast target, 4 ring diameters. The pilot had to remember dozens of combinations. Under stress, at high speed, while maneuvering, most pilots just guessed. Chen realized what was needed: visual reference points on the gunsight glass itself, specific marks that corresponded to common kamikaze deflection scenarios. Instead of doing math, the pilot would just place the target at the correct mark and fire. The marks would encode the mathematics visually. The pilot's job would become target recognition and placement, not calculation. That evening, Chen went to the ship's supply office, asked for colored electrical tape. The supply clerk looked at him strangely, but gave him 3 rolls: red, yellow, and blue. Chen took the tape back to the maintenance spaces, cut small pieces, sat at his workbench thinking about deflection angles. Kamikazes flew predictable profiles. Most came in at shallow dive angles, 15 to 20 degrees, trying to hit ship's superstructures. Most flew between 250 and 300 miles per hour. Most were intercepted between 400 and 600 yards. Those parameters were consistent. The deflection leads for those scenarios could be pre-calculated and marked on the gun sight glass. Chen did the math. For a target at 500 yards, crossing at 60 degrees angle off, traveling 280 miles per hour, with the Corsair traveling 350 miles per hour, the required lead was approximately 4 ring diameters. For 45 degrees angle off, same speeds and range, the lead was approximately 3 ring diameters. For 30 degrees, approximately 2 ring diameters. 3 common intercept scenarios. 3 marks on the gun sight glass. But where to place the marks? Chen studied a spare gun sight. The projected reticle floated in the center of the glass. If he placed colored tape marks on the glass at specific positions relative to the reticle center, pilots could use those marks as aiming references. Red tape for high deflection shots, yellow for medium deflection, blue for low deflection. Simple color coding, no math required. See target, identify angle, place target at correct color mark, fire. The challenge was getting the positions exact. Chen used a ruler and protractor, measured angles from the reticle center, calculated where each mark needed to be placed on the glass to correspond to the correct deflection lead at average engagement range. Cut the tape pieces into small squares, approximately 3 millimeters per side. Small enough not to obstruct the pilot's view, large enough to be clearly visible. He installed the first set on his own workbench gun sight. 3 marks, red at 4 o'clock position, 8 centimeters from reticle center, yellow at 3 o'clock, 6 centimeters, blue at 2 o'clock, 4 centimeters. The positions corresponded to high, medium, and low deflection scenarios. He looked through the sight, imagined tracking a target, placing it at each mark. It felt intuitive, visual. No calculation required. But this was theory. Combat was different. Chen needed to test it. He needed a pilot willing to try something unofficial, something that would look ridiculous to anyone who didn't understand deflection shooting. Lieutenant Doug Whitman was the squadron's newest pilot, 22 years old, from Oregon. He'd been with VF-83 for 6 weeks, 7 combat missions, 0 confirmed kills. Not because Whitman was a bad pilot, because he couldn't hit crossing targets. He'd made 14 firing passes at Kamikazes, missed 13, got minor hits on 1. His gun camera footage showed the same pattern as everyone else. Tracers passing behind, then ahead, never connecting. Whitman was frustrated. Told Chen he knew how to shoot. He'd been top of his class at gunnery training. But training used slow-moving, towed targets at predictable ranges. Kamikazes were different, faster, more aggressive, less predictable range. By the time Whitman calculated the lead, the geometry had changed. He felt like he was always chasing the solution, never ahead of it. Chen found Whitman in the ready room on the evening of March 16th, showed him the marked gun sight, explained the concept, color-coded visual references for common deflection scenarios, no math, just target recognition and placement. Whitman looked skeptical but interested, asked if it had been tested. Chen said no. Asked if it was authorized. Chen said no. Whitman asked if Chen thought it would work. Chen said he didn't know. The math was correct, the visual principle was sound, but combat was unpredictable. It might work, it might not. Whitman would be the test. If it worked, great. If it didn't, they'd remove the tape and pretend it never happened. If anyone asked questions, Chen would take responsibility. Whitman agreed, said he had nothing to lose. He wasn't hitting anything using the current method. If colored tape helped, he'd try it. If it didn't, he'd be exactly where he was now. That night, Chen installed the marked tape on Whitman's gun sight. 3 colored squares.
red, yellow, blue, positioned precisely based on his calculations. Took 15 minutes. When finished, the marks were barely visible unless you knew they were there. Small colored dots on the gunsight glass. Chen explained how to use them. Red mark for targets crossing above 50 degrees angle off. Yellow for 30 to 50 degrees. Blue for less than 30 degrees. Estimate the target's crossing angle. Place the target at the appropriate color mark, fire. Let the mark do the math. Whitman looked through the sight. Practiced tracking an imaginary target, moving his head to place the target at each colored mark. After a few minutes, he said it felt natural, intuitive. He could see how it would work. Whether it would work in combat was another question. The test came on March 18th. General quarters sounded at 1620. Radar had picked up a large formation inbound, 20-plus bogies. The kamikaze attack everyone had been expecting. All squadrons launched. Whitman was number 4 in a division of Corsairs. Chen watched from the flight deck as Whitman's aircraft launched and climbed northwest toward the threat. The engagement started at 1647. Whitman's division intercepted 8 kamikazes at 12,000 feet, 40 miles from the fleet. The kamikazes were a mix of Zeros and Vals, all rigged with bombs, all flying straight toward the ships. No evasion, just maximum speed runs. Whitman picked a Val on the left side of the formation, rolled in from above. The Val was in a shallow dive, crossing left to right at approximately 60 degrees angle off, range 500 yards, high deflection scenario. Whitman looked through his gun sight, saw the red mark, placed the Val's nose at the red mark. Didn't calculate, didn't think, just placed and fired. His 6.50 calibers hammered. Tracers reached out, connected. The rounds walked into the Val's cockpit and engine. The Val's engine exploded. Pieces flew off. The aircraft rolled right and fell away, trailing fire. Whitman's first kill. 3 seconds from acquisition to destruction. No missed shots, no corrections. First burst on target.
But there was no time to think about it. Another Val was crossing in front of him. Medium deflection, approximately 40 degrees angle off. Range 400 yards. Whitman looked for the yellow mark, placed the Val at the mark, fired. 2-second burst. Hit the Val in the left wing root and fuselage. The wing folded. The Val tumbled. 2 kills in 30 seconds. A Zero crossed right to left. Low deflection, maybe 25 degrees angle off. Close range, 300 yards. Whitman found the blue mark, placed the Zero's nose on it, fired. The rounds tore through the Zero's cockpit. The Zero nosed over and dove into the ocean. 3 kills in less than 2 minutes. Whitman had never shot down anything before this mission. Now he destroyed 3 kamikazes in one engagement, and he'd done it without calculating a single deflection angle, just target recognition, mark placement, trigger squeeze. The division returned to Essex at 1720. Whitman was the last to land. When he climbed out of his cockpit, his hands were shaking. His flight suit was soaked with sweat. He walked straight to Chen, said one word: 3. Chen asked how the marks had worked. Whitman said they were perfect, absolutely perfect. He hadn't thought about deflection once, just looked at the target, identified the crossing angle category, placed the target at the corresponding mark, fired. Every burst connected. He'd expended less than 300 rounds total for 3 kills. Normally, he'd fire 200 rounds and miss. Today, he'd fired 300 and killed 3. Word spread through the squadron by evening. Whitman had gotten 3 kills, first kills of his career. Other pilots asked how. Whitman showed them the colored tape marks on his gun sight, explained how they worked. Within an hour, 6 pilots asked Chen if he could do the same modification to their gun sights. Chen said yes, but they needed to understand something. The marks were based on average engagement parameters. If the target was flying unusually fast or slow, or the range was very different from typical, the marks might be slightly off. They weren't perfect for every situation, but for the common scenarios, kamikazes making standard approaches at standard speeds, they would work. The pilots said they understood. They'd been missing kamikazes using the standard method. If the marks helped them hit 70% of targets instead of 30%, that was good enough. Over the next 3 days, Chen marked 18 gun sights. He refined his technique, made a template to ensure consistent mark placement, used slightly larger tape pieces so they were easier to see in combat, added a fourth color, green, for very low deflection shots at targets going nearly straight away or coming nearly head-on.
By March 22nd, half of VF-83's pilots were flying with marked gun sights. The results were immediate and measurable. Before the marks, the squadron's kill rate against kamikazes was 1.3 confirmed per 10 intercepts. After the marks, it jumped to 3.8 per 10 intercepts, nearly triple. Pilots who'd never gotten kills were coming back with 2 or 3. Ammunition expenditure per kill dropped from an average of 340 rounds to 180 rounds. Pilots were shooting less and hitting more. On March 25th, Rear Admiral Frederick Sherman visited Essex. Sherman was commander of Task Group 58.3, responsible for coordinating carrier air operations in the Okinawa campaign. Part of his job was evaluating combat effectiveness and identifying best practices. Sherman noticed that VF-83's kill claims against kamikazes had spiked dramatically. He asked the squadron commander, Commander Paul Richards, what had changed. Richards explained about the gun sight tape marks, the color-coded deflection references, how they had been installed by one of the squadron's mechanics, how pilots were using them to hit crossing targets without calculating deflection angles. Sherman was skeptical, asked to see one of the marked gun sights. Richards took him to the flight line, showed him Whitman's aircraft. Sherman looked through the gun sight, saw the colored tape marks, asked who'd come up with this. Richards said Aviation Machinist's mate, second class Robert Chen. Sherman asked where Chen was. They found Chen in the maintenance spaces working on a hydraulic system. Sherman asked Chen to explain the marks. Chen explained the concept, pre-calculated deflection leads for common scenarios, visual encoding of the mathematics, color coding for easy target identification. Sherman asked if this was authorized. Chen said, "No, sir, it was not. It was a field expedient, something he'd tried because pilots were missing targets." Sherman asked if it worked. Chen said the statistics suggested it did. Sherman asked Richards for the data. Richards provided it. Before the marks, 1.3 kills per 10 intercepts. After, 3.8 per 10. Sherman studied the numbers, asked how many pilots were using the marked gun sights. Richards said 18 out of 36. Sherman asked why not all of them. Richards said some pilots preferred the standard gun sight, didn't want tape on their glass. Sherman asked what their kill rates were. Richards said approximately the same as before, 1.2 to 1.4 per 10 intercepts. Sherman looked at the data for a long moment, then asked Chen if he could install the marks on gun sights for other squadrons in the task group. Chen said yes, sir, if ordered. Sherman said he was ordering it. Every fighter squadron in Task Group 58.3 would have the option to use marked gun sights. Pilots who wanted them would get them. Pilots who didn't wouldn't, but the option would be available. Chen would train other squadron mechanics on the installation procedure.
Richards looked uncomfortable, said the modification wasn't officially approved, hadn't been evaluated by the Navy's Bureau of Aeronautics, might not meet regulatory standards. Sherman said he didn't care about regulatory standards. He cared about killing kamikazes before they hit ships. If colored tape helped pilots do that, he wanted every pilot to have it. Regulations could catch up later. Over the next 2 weeks, Chen trained 12 mechanics from other squadrons, showed them how to calculate mark positions, how to install the tape, how to explain the system to pilots. By mid-April, over 200 carrier fighters in Task Force 58 had marked gun sights. The modification spread squadron to squadron, ship to ship. No official documentation, no engineering approval, just mechanics showing mechanics, pilots telling pilots. The impact was clear in the statistics.
In March, before the marks became widespread, Task Force 58's CAP intercepted and destroyed 34% of kamikazes before they reached the fleet. In April, that rate jumped to 58%. In May, 67%. More kamikazes were being shot down. Fewer were reaching the ships. Fewer ships were being hit. Fewer sailors were dying. The Japanese noticed. Kamikaze pilots began reporting that American fighters were becoming significantly more accurate. Attack runs that had been relatively safe in January and February were lethal by April and May. The Americans weren't flying differently. They were just hitting more consistently. Japanese commanders tried to adapt, sent kamikazes in at different angles, different speeds, different altitudes. But the fundamental problem remained. American pilots had a tool that let them solve deflection shooting instinctively. The Japanese couldn't counter that with tactics. On June 8, 1945, a team from the Bureau of Aeronautics arrived on Essex to evaluate the gunsight modifications. 2 engineers and a test pilot. They'd heard about the colored tape marks through unofficial channels, wanted to understand what was being done and whether it should be officially adopted. They examined the marked gunsights, interviewed pilots, reviewed combat statistics, flew test missions. After 4 days of evaluation, they wrote their report. The modification was crude but effective. The concept of visual deflection references was sound. The implementation, colored electrical tape, was not ideal for long-term use. The tape could peel off, degrade in sunlight, obstruct the pilot's view if improperly placed. But the underlying idea was valid and should be developed properly. The engineers recommended that the Navy design an official gun sight with integrated deflection reference marks, etched into the glass or painted with durable materials. But in the meantime, the field-installed tape marks should remain. They were improving combat effectiveness measurably. Removing them would reduce pilot effectiveness while waiting for the official version.
The report went to the Bureau of Aeronautics in Washington, sat on desks for 3 weeks. On July 2nd, official guidance came down. The tape mark modification was approved for continued use until an official gunsight redesign could be manufactured. Mechanics were authorized to install the marks per standardized specifications. A technical bulletin would be issued with proper mark positions and installation procedures. Robert Chen's name appeared nowhere in the official documentation. The technical bulletin attributed the modification to field evaluation by squadron maintenance personnel. No specific individual was mentioned. No commendation was issued. But by August 1945, virtually every Navy fighter in the Pacific had some form of deflection reference marks on the gun sight. Some used colored tape, some used grease pencil, some used paint. The methods varied, but the concept was universal. Visual deflection aids that let pilots shoot instinctively instead of calculating mathematically. The impact extended beyond kamikazes. Pilots using marked gun sights were also more effective against conventional fighters. Deflection shooting worked the same regardless of target intent. The marks helped pilots hit anything that crossed their sight picture. By war's end, Navy fighter squadrons using marked gun sights had kill-to-loss ratios approximately 40% better than squadrons without them. Doug Whitman survived the war. He flew 38 combat missions with VF-83, shot down 14 Japanese aircraft, 12 kamikazes, and 2 conventional fighters. Returned to Oregon in October 1945. Went to college on the GI Bill. Became a high school math teacher. Taught geometry and trigonometry for 36 years. He always told his students about the gun sight tape, how someone had taken complex mathematics and encoded it visually, how that visual encoding had saved lives, how sometimes the best solution to a math problem is to eliminate the need for calculation entirely. Admiral Sherman continued his career after the war, retired as full admiral in 1947, wrote his memoirs, included a chapter about improving modifications in combat, and used the gunsight tape as an example of frontline innovation that saved lives, argued that the Navy needed to be more receptive to ideas from enlisted personnel who saw problems firsthand. Robert Chen stayed in the Navy until 1954, made Chief Petty Officer in 1948, served on 3 different carriers, returned to San Francisco in 1954, opened an auto repair shop, worked on cars for 39 years. He never talked much about the war. When customers asked, he'd say he was a mechanic on carriers, fixed airplanes. That was all. In 1987, a naval historian researching carrier operations at Okinawa found references to the gunsight tape modification in squadron war diaries. The historian noticed that several squadrons credited improved kill rates to modified gunsighting procedures. The historian tracked down Chen through veteran registries.
Chen was 66 years old then, still working part-time at his shop. The historian asked about the modification. Chen confirmed the story, said it wasn't anything complicated, just a way to help pilots aim faster. The historian asked if Chen understood the impact. Chen said he knew some pilots had better success with the marks. That was enough. The historian estimated that the gunsight modification improved Navy fighter effectiveness against kamikazes by approximately 180% based on before and after kill rate analysis. Extrapolating from casualty data, the modification likely prevented between 40 and 60 kamikaze hits on American ships. Each prevented hit saved an average of 12 sailors' lives. The colored tape marks probably saved between 500 and 700 American lives over the course of the Okinawa campaign. Chen said he never counted. He just remembered the pilots who came back. Whitman, Morrison, the others. Kids, really. They went up against kamikazes every day knowing one might get through. The least he could do was give them a better chance. Robert Chen died in 2009 at age 88. He was buried in Golden Gate National Cemetery in California. His obituary mentioned his service in World War II as an aircraft mechanic aboard USS Essex. It mentioned his auto repair business. It did not mention the gunsight tape modification, did not mention that he'd changed how Navy fighters engaged kamikazes, did not mention that he'd saved hundreds of lives with colored electrical tape and basic geometry. His shop in San Francisco is gone now, closed in 2008, replaced with condominiums. But at the National Naval Aviation Museum in Pensacola, Florida, there's an F4U Corsair on display. The gunsight glass has 4 small colored marks: red, yellow, blue, green, positioned at specific points around the reticle. A small placard explains that these marks represent a field modification developed by carrier mechanics in 1945 to improve deflection shooting against kamikazes. The placard doesn't name Robert Chen, but pilots who flew with marked gunsights know. And for Chen, that was always enough. That's how innovation actually happens in war. Not through engineering committees or official programs, through mechanics who see pilots struggling and find simple solutions, through people who understand that sometimes the answer to a complex problem is making it visual instead of mathematical, through sailors who know that bringing shipmates home matters more than following procedures. If you found this story compelling, please take a moment to like this video. It helps us share more forgotten stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to stay connected with these untold histories. Each one matters. Each one deserves to be remembered. And leave a comment below telling us where you're watching from. Our community spans from Alaska to Australia, from veterans to history enthusiasts. You're part of something special here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for keeping these stories alive.